I'm an avid traveler always searching for remote spots to explore. The more remote the better, so when I found a listing on Airbnb for a cottage set deep in the countryside, it seemed like a perfect opportunity, with a quaint little stone building surrounded by rolling hills and meadows, far removed from the noise and chaos of the city. My girlfriend Sarah and I immediately fell in love with the pictures and booked it for a week. The owners Karen and Jack met us at the entrance when we arrived. They seemed like lovely people, warm and welcoming. "We were so glad you could come," Karen said, as she handed us the keys, stating that they are just down the road if we needed anything. The cottage was even better in person. Wooden beams, cozy rooms filled with antique furniture. The fireplace that added a sense of rustic charm. We spent the first 5 nights relaxing, hiking the trails around the property and taking trips to the nearby village. Most of all enjoyed the peace and quiet that only the countryside can provide. Life had never felt so simple and perfect. On the 6th day Sarah was dusting off a shelf in the bedroom when she froze. She called me out, asking to come quickly. I walked over and saw her pointing at a small black object nestled between some books. I picked it up and looked at it closely, only to realize that it was a camera. A small but sophisticated camera concealed in between the books. A wave of nausea washed over me. Though her voice wavered, Sarah suggested we look in around, and we decided to search the rest of the cottage. We found another camera hidden in a potted plant in the living room, one in the bathroom disguised as a nozzle inside an air freshener and another in the kitchen camouflaged among the appliances. The feeling of violation was unbearable. I felt foolish and gullible for not realizing sooner that something was off. All the instances where we had enjoyed private moments, conversations, and the comfort of seclusion, someone had been watching us all along. We decided to confront Karen and Jack, so we drove down the road to where they said their home was located. However, when we arrived the place looked abandoned, like no one had been there for years. A sense of dread filled the air. We knocked, waited and knocked again, but no answer. We called their phone numbers, but both went straight to voicemail. With a sense of urgency, we went back to the cottage and packed our bags. Before leaving I took pictures of all the camera locations as evidence. We drove until we reached the nearest town and checked into a hotel. From there, we contacted Airbnb and the local police, providing them with all the information and evidence we had gathered. Airbnb took the listing down immediately and promised a full investigation. Days turned into weeks and we were back in our home city trying to get back to our normal routine, but the sense of violation lingered, haunting us. Finally, we received an update from the local police. They had gone to inspect the property and found it empty. Further investigation revealed that Karen and Jack were not the owners of the property. The real owners had been traveling abroad for months and their identities had been stolen. The property had been listed without their knowledge, and the unsettling part is that despite an investigation they never found Karen and Jack. The bank accounts they used had been set up using false identities, and the photos on the Airbnb listing were a duplicate of the true property listing. They had vanished, leaving us with nothing but a lingering sense of unease. The one thing that haunts us the most is the fact that whoever Karen and Jack were, they are still out there, perhaps watching someone else in another perfect cottage somewhere. When I found the perfect house, a sprawling historic gem tucked away in the Peak District that could host all 10 of us in surprisingly cheap rate, I thought I had hit the jackpot. Before making the final arrangements, I reached out to Jonathan, the host, about possibly having a hot tub delivered for the weekend. He declined, citing that the property sat on church grounds and it would be inappropriate. When we pulled up to the house, we were stunned by its beauty. It sat isolated in a vast landscape of greenery. Rolling hills and picturesque views stretching as far as the eye could see. The interior matched the grandeur of the exterior, antique chandeliers, original artworks on the walls, intricately carved furniture and luxurious bedrooms, each with a different theme. Velvet curtains, four-poster beds and vintage dressers filled the rooms, and the linens felt as soft as clouds. However, we soon discovered peculiar handwritten notes placed around the house. One beautifully patterned cream sofa had the message, "A grave mistake has been made." On a bathroom mirror another read, "Reflect on your actions, water remembers." Yet another in the kitchen strangely advised, "Food prepared here feeds more than the body." We let it slide, stating it must be the owner's weird sense of humor. By the evening the last of our group arrived and we gathered in the kitchen for welcome drinks. We toasted with Prosecco, momentarily putting aside the weird notes. During the toast someone noticed an extension cord running from an outlet in the kitchen going out through an open window. Intrigued we decided to follow the cord. It led us to a rusty ancient-looking caravan parked behind the property. Peering through its windows revealed a disturbing sight. The inside was cluttered with splayed-out taxidermized animals and sharp rusty tools scattered about. Before we could process what we were seeing, an old man suddenly appeared, causing us to jump. He was dressed bizarrely formal. A waistcoat, cravat and an old-fashioned pocket watch. He introduced himself as Jonathan. This was the guy who denied the hot tub request before our arrival. With an unsettling calmness he said he would be spending the night in the caravan. "Let's pretend I'm not here," he added. His demeanor unnerved us. We small talked for a while and eventually went back inside. Later, as the party went up a few notches, driven by a blend of curiosity and alcohol-induced courage, we ventured deeper into the house. We found a locked door, but it was old and the lock was easily manipulated. Inside was another unsettling discovery. A taxidermy room, but unlike any we had ever seen. Animals were stitched into bizarre otherworldly configurations. A mouse with the beak of a crow, a deer with multiple heads each more disturbing than the last, and a large crucifix also sat on the wall. We retreated to the living room, laughed a little too loudly, hugged a little too tightly as if trying to dispel the strange energy surrounding us. We all got blind drunk, and whilst most of the party made it to their beds, I experienced a crazily intense bout of room spin, passing out on the living room sofa. My friends could not wake me, so I spent the next few hours drooling on the sofa. Later that night I was jolted awake by footsteps followed by a metallic scraping sound. My heart pounded in my chest as I listened. The living room door handle slowly turned. It was Jonathan. I quickly closed my eyes and pretended to be asleep. He walked over and stood over me completely motionless. All I could do was listen to his weird, staggered breaths, expelling horribly from his mouth. I silently prayed he would leave me alone. Finally, he turned to leave the room, and as he left, I could just make out him sharpening a scalpel on a stone block. I heard his footsteps fade away and the crunch of gravel told me he had returned to his caravan. That was enough for me. I darted out of the room and woke up my friends, spilling out the events in frantic hushed tones. Without a second thought my friends offered to drive me home, and I eagerly agreed as we navigated the winding roads. My thoughts were a cocktail of confusion and relief. I knew we had dodged something demeanor and potentially very dark that night. We never returned to that house, and we never learned why it was built on church grounds or what those disturbing notes in taxidermy meant, but I did learn something valuable. If a deal seems too good to be true, it almost certainly is. We were thrilled to be staying in a charming Airbnb in rural France. This place was so rural that a key under the mat was still acceptable. You could never get away with this in Chicago. The first 2 days went by like a dream, filled with great food, sightseeing, and relaxation. The house was beautiful, nestled among vineyards and rolling hills. The rooms were tastefully decorated and everything felt comfortable and welcoming. It was supposed to be a perfect vacation, and up until that point it had been. On our third night I woke up with a startle. I heard muffled noises coming from downstairs. I looked at the bedside clock, but its screen was blank. The power was out and the noise strained my ears as I tried to make sense of the sounds. I suddenly realized they were whispers and my heart started to race. My wife stirred beside me asking what was going on as my tense posture signaled to something bad. I whispered gently telling her that I think I hear people downstairs. We both listened to the whispers that were accompanied by other sounds such as the sound of the front door creaking, then the sound of someone fumbling at the back door, etc. We both looked at each other, eyes wide open as someone was trying to get into the house, or worst, someone was already in the house. Our breathing became shallow as we debated whether to call the police or not, but our phones were charging in the living room. Just at that moment we heard the internal door opening, which was coming from the direction of the connecting garage. Whoever was outside had found a way into the house. We heard the intruders dragging something heavy across the floor downstairs. The scraping sound on the wooden flooring made my stomach churn. Then they began ascending the stairs. Each step felt like a drumbeat heralding something awful. "We need to hide," I whispered, pulling my wife toward the closet. We closed the door behind us as quietly as we could, as we heard footsteps growing closer, stopping outside our bedroom door. The door handle turned, our hearts pounded, and the door creaked open. Two figures entered and paused. They seemed to be searching for something, then they looked directly at the closet. We had been spotted. In a moment of adrenaline and fueled instinct, I burst out of the closet and lunged at the closest intruder, gripping them by the throat. A struggle broke out, our bodies crashing into the furniture, knocking over the bedside lamp. I was fueled by sheer panic and convinced we were fighting for our lives. Just then the room filled with light, as the power was back on. My wife flipped the switch and yelled stop. And the harsh light lit everyone's faces, as confusion reigned. These were not criminals. They were just as shocked as we were. "Who are you? Why are you in our house?" one of the intruders said, as they gasped for air after my chokehold. "Your house?" I gasped, still catching my breath. "This is our Airbnb, that we rented out." The four of us looked at each other in utter disbelief. It took a few minutes and some shaky conversations to figure out what had happened. It turned out that we were in the wrong house. Our Airbnb was a few houses down and we had mistakenly entered and made ourselves at home in a house that looked almost identical to the one in the Airbnb photos. These intruders were the actual homeowners returning from a long weekend trip, puzzled to find their door unlocked and strangers sleeping in their bedroom. They had been equally scared, thinking they were confronting burglars. The dragging noise was them moving a suitcase inside as quietly as possible to not alert the intruders. The realization was as shocking as it was humiliating for us. We gathered our belongings, profusely apologizing for the immense misunderstanding. They were gracious but visibly shaken, as were we. Finally, we located our actual Airbnb a few doors down and spent the night replaying the events over and over in our heads, grateful that the night had not taken a darker turn. It was a sobering lesson in the importance of double-checking details and a stark reminder that sometimes the most unsettling experiences come not from malevolent intentions but from a series of unfortunate misunderstandings, and so in the most awkward way possible our vacation became memorable, but for all the wrong reasons. Imagine booking a dream weekend getaway in a floating cabin. Luxury, isolation, and the serenity of a secluded lake. Now imagine that dream turning into a nightmare when Layla found the floating barrel cabin on Airbnb. I thought it was a joke. Scrolling through the photos of the huge barrel bobbing gently on the calm waters made me uneasy. To her, it seemed perfect as she grinned with excitement on her face, even claiming it to be an adventure which we will remember forever. The listing described the experience as water glamping. I'd never seen anything like it before. We packed for a weekend away with the excitement of isolation mixed with luxury pulling us in. We arranged to meet the owner Katie, who was quite friendly, and our journey started by boarding a small boat which was ours for the weekend. This just made the experience feel even more exclusive. Katie asked if we have any experience on the water. We both shook our heads. Our response made her pensive, as the claim that it made her feel a little nervous, as she did not want to jeopardize the experience. We did what we could to alleviate the owner's fears, telling her that it will be fine. Layla jumped in the conversation, mentioning she did lots of kayaking as a kid as well. This seemed to ease Katie a bit. Layla got excited as she imagined the stories we'll have, as we motored away from the mainland. We hooped and punched the air as we followed the owners to the cabin in their separate boat. Our first sight of the cabin had us in awe. The giant barrel cabin sat by itself, tethered in the middle of the giant lake. We docked the boats and Katie showed us around the barrel accommodation. It was compact but furnished in a way that made it feel like a luxury space. The huge barrel shape was connected to a floating platform and was surprisingly well stocked with an onboard bar, DVD and TV setup. It even had a gas-powered barbecue, and electricity was through a solar panel setup on the roof. One of the dominant features was the domed window, giving an unobstructed panoramic view of the surrounding lake. The water was still, and, in the distance, we could hear the sounds of a nearby wildlife sanctuary. Katie gave us a wave as she motored away in the boat. With Katie long gone, we both relaxed into our deck chairs, embracing the silence and serenity of the isolated lake cabin. We were totally alone in the wilderness. Nightfall came swiftly, with 1,000 mosquitoes keeping us company as we barbecued our dinner. We laughed and swatted the mosquitoes away, eventually escaping to the sanctuary inside our cabin. We even made jokes about being surrounded by the local wildlife, making our stay feel even more adventurous as we drank wine and watched a movie on Netflix that I downloaded onto my phone. We both passed out into a deep sleep until a massive thunderstorm rolled in. Each flash of lightning illuminated our little cabin in stark contrast to the dark. Rain began pelting down and the water grew choppy. The barrel cabin started to rock, and I tried to calm Layla's nerves, insisting that these cabins were built to withstand such weather. But when I noticed a trickle of water coming from the top of the barrel, I realized the storm was maybe more than this floating marvel could handle. As the minutes passed, the trickle became a stream and our luxury floating cabin was taking in water. Layla's face was pale and I whispered to her, to calm her down, all the while trying to hide my rising panic. We were close to the shore. In a worst-case scenario, we could use the boat to get back, but the reality was I had no experience of boating in storms like this, and to add on top of it, the wildlife sanctuary was known for having a large number of crocodiles in the water, so swimming definitely was not an option. I started to think about our options when the power suddenly went out, enveloping us in total darkness. The water must have got into the electrics, and I reached for my flashlight in my backpack to illuminate the room. I turned my flashlight on, shining it around the barrel, looking for anything to stop the water. Layla pointed to the domed window. With her voice trembling, she pointed at the end of my flashlight. Just then, we caught a dozen of illuminated eyes which were surrounding the cabin, reflecting the light with a sinister glow. The crocodiles, attracted by the storm, they were all around us. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. Here we were in a leaking cabin surrounded by one of the most fearsome predators on the planet, and we need to get to the boat at any cost now. With our bodies and voices trembling, we slowly moved, and packed our essentials while the sound of the pouring rain was deafening. The lightning flashed, and it illuminated our small cabin, now surrounded by looming shapes in the water. The cabin was now taking on water, and we took a deep breath and moved towards the boat. Holding each other, we tried to make as little noise as possible, with our torch as our only guide in the pitch-black darkness. The boat was a few agonizing meters away, and the rain made the deck slippery. Each step felt like an eternity, and Layla nearly slipped one time, but I held her tightly as we approached the boat. We finally reached the boat, our hearts pounding heavily. Starting the motor was nerve-wracking as it had a pull-cord starter rope soaked by the rain, and every time I tried to pull the cord my hand slipped and the starter petered out 1 time, 2 times, 3 times, always failing to get enough purchase on the cord handle. The crocodile, sensing movement, started moving towards the boat. With a roar, the boat's engine came to life and we slowly reached the mainland. Our clothes drenched and our spirits shaken as we disembarked. Layla looked at me, her eyes wide with relief on that close call. We called Katie, who came and picked us up and apologized profusely for the ordeal. In hindsight, I can't really blame her for what happened. It was a storm like I had never seen before in my life. Also, she didn't invite the crocodiles to visit us. Years have passed since that harrowing experience, but the panic, the fear, and the feeling of being trapped still lingers. We still travel, but now we stay firmly on solid ground.